Then we have Daniel Bryan confronting the Authority. And I will say that I have not seen Triple H and Stephanie in particular, get this kind of heat since this whole angle started. She was getting so much heat and so many boos from the crowd. I could not, it was hard for me to understand what she was saying. And I had emails from people who were in the building who said they couldn't hear her at all. I mean, they just were chanting and assuming that she was saying bad stuff about Daniel Bryan because they couldn't make out the words that were coming out of her mouth. It was so loud in the building. And again, I think Chicago is one of the better crowds, and part of that may have been the hijack people who were chanting for Punk and Bryan and whatever. But it made for a great atmosphere in the segment. WWE got exactly what they wanted. They got great heel heat on the heels. And what's funny about this is they had Bryan come out, and Bryan used the word hijack in his promo. At one point, he rallied the crowd and said, "Let's hijack Raw." And like puppets, everybody cheered. They said, "Yeah, let's hijack the show." So I think it was brilliant on WWE's part the way they manipulated the crowd. Because the crowd thought they were there to hijack the show. In reality, WWE hijacked the crowd. And they didn't even realize it. So I thought that was a brilliant move on their part. Kind of working that into the show in a very subtle way. And the fans just went along with it. Just like they were supposed to. So we had some loud asshole chants during the segment for Triple H. Just like the old days. And once again, he rejected Bryan's challenge to a match at WrestleMania. Why would I wrestle a B-plus player? Why would I lower myself to wrestle somebody like you? WrestleMania is the biggest event of the year. I wrestle legends and big stars, and you're none of them. And he told Bryan to get out of the ring. Bryan said, "Why don't you make me?" Which led to Stephanie calling Kane to come to the ring. And Bryan did a tope onto Kane out on the floor. Stephanie had security take Bryan to the back. He was still going to come back out later to wrestle Batista in the main event. So this was a hot segment in terms of how the crowd was reacting, in terms of further building the story for Bryan and Triple H. It's obvious they're going to wrestle at WrestleMania. The whole thing about Bryan getting a title match, I still think he's getting the championship at WrestleMania. You can call me a fool if you want to. I think the end game here is that Bryan ends WrestleMania with 75,000 people chanting yes, and a big championship celebration to end the pay-per-view. That's how I see WrestleMania. You want to know what I think the WrestleMania ending is? There's your WrestleMania ending right there, and I think it's going to happen. I don't know how they're going to get to that point. We have several more weeks before we have to worry about that, but I just can't imagine any other ending to the show this year. I certainly can't imagine that Batista and Randy Orton, as things stand, go one-on-one in the final match on the card, and that's how the show ends, with Batista winning the title. I don't see it. It's not impossible, but it's pretty damn close. I don't see that happening. So I'm just going to enjoy the ride. We'll see how they get there. I trust that in the end, things will work themselves out. And you know what? Even if it doesn't, what the hell are you going to do? Bryan is in a great spot right now. If he's not in a championship match at WrestleMania, he's still in one of the main event matches. And in fact, if he's not in the title match and they have the guts to keep Batista versus Orton as it is, which I think they would be fucking nuts to do, but if they do that, there's no way Batista versus Orton goes on last. So then it becomes an issue of, well, what do you put on last? The only match to me that would make sense would be Bryan versus Triple H. And I know, Triple H main eventing WrestleMania, but in this case, it would make sense. You just can't end the show with Batista versus Orton one-on-one. You can't do that. Any other year, I would say Undertaker's match would have to be a consideration for the main event. I don't see Undertaker Brock as being, the final match on the card. You always run the risk with the Undertaker of him going out there having a kick-ass match, even if his opponent has to kind of carry him physically. I think it's a combination of having the right opponent and just the aura of the streak and all the near falls, and it can take the energy right out of the crowd. You always run the risk when you don't put his match on last of burning out the crowd for whatever comes next. I certainly hope they don't do Undertaker Brock and then immediately do Bryan versus Triple H. I'm sure Triple H also wouldn't like that, because Triple H more than once has found himself in that position, having to follow The Undertaker. Last year, for example, and the crowd was mostly dead for his match, just like they were his match against Orton at WrestleMania 25. How could you top what Undertaker and Shawn Michaels did on that card? And how could you not know going in that those two guys were going to go out there and have the kind of match that they had? So poor Triple H has had this happen to him now, really 3 different times at a WrestleMania, if you count the Rock Hogan match at 18, and then him and Jericho went out there, And they had a good match, but the crowd didn't care. The crowd was just like, whatever. Yeah, and I felt bad for Jericho. That's his one and only WrestleMania main event, and nobody cared. So believe me, I'm sure Triple H does not want to be put in that position again. Bryan versus Triple H is the only match that makes sense for the main event unless Bryan is inserted into the championship match. So I'm just going to wait and see how things play out. But like I was saying before, Bryan is in a good position compared to where he was a year ago. Look at where he is now. Supposedly, post-WrestleMania, him and Cena are the top two guys that are going to be factored into plans going forward. Cena number 1, Bryan number 2. It's not a bad spot to be in. Essentially, Bryan is getting CM Punk's spot. CM Punk leaving has only helped Daniel Bryan. Because Punk was the number 2 guy. He was the number 2 babyface before. And now that spot belongs to Bryan. So, he'll be in a headline match at Mania. He'll get the title at some point. And things are going good. And he finally has some decent merchandise on top of everything else. They got rid of a lot of the crappy shirts. He's got some merchandise that I wouldn't be embarrassed to be seen wearing on the street. So things are going well for the guy. And I'm happy to see that.